Everybody hear me? Is the mic working? Okay, super. Good morning. I saw from the WhatsApp that it was an exciting night last night. I actually joined the spring school in, I guess, virtually last year, and I have to say that this is far better in person. So thank you for having me here. Um, I started looking at things in virtual reality way back in 2006. So it's been a minute, and during the past about 20 years or so, we have gone through many shifts in how virtual reality is perceived. I mean, it's quite stunning, and I'm sure everybody in the audience feels the same way that we're actually able to have a audience who is when I first set up my lab, it was really a struggle to get students to come work for me. So I had one student with one headset, and that one student was a doctoral student who was just too nice to say no to me. This is back in 2011. It's just like, what would I do with virtual reality after I graduate? And within the next 3 or 4 years, things just exploded. And so it's quite interesting how we're in this transformative time where immersive media is being researched at a pace that we're not like I've never seen anything like this, and so it's an absolute delight to be able to share what we've been doing for the past 15 years or so in terms of social scientific research within immersive spaces and how we are able to look at things in a variety of different ways. And so I'd be sharing some of the work that we've been doing in the past recent 7 or 8 years in the center. I am currently the director for the Center for Advanced Computer-Human Ecosystems at the University of Georgia. I started this laboratory back in 2010, and so we have been in operation for a while. And typically, our bread and butter tends to be very similar to some of the areas that other keynote speakers have touched upon. So how do virtual experiences continue to impact your attitudes and behaviors in the real world? And what are some of the ways that we're able to take this technology out from the ivory tower into the community? And so we work pretty closely with community organizations, and we do a lot of scaled efforts where we're able to take it into the schools, into the organizations, out into the areas where we think that these technologies can have a direct impact on the way that they live their lives, make decisions, and remain informed consumers. Largely, we work in these sorts of areas now that the funding situation has shifted pretty dramatically in the US. I'm not sure that we will continue this for the next 3 or 4 years, but up until this point, it's been primarily in the domains of public health, sustainability, structural inequities, and then I'll talk a little bit about future directions of where we're going within the media landscape of immersive experiences. So within public health, what have we doing with these XR spaces? When we discuss what is social about social XR, there are a variety of dimensions of being social and having social interaction. So I'll speak a little bit about what these mean when you say social XR. What are you socializing with? What are you interacting with? And then some of the things that we study as communication scholars within the field of communication. Physical activity, we know, is critical for a lot of people, and particularly in the southeast region where I live. So I'm from the state of Georgia, and in that area where we call is the Bible Belt, it's a southeastern area of the United States, obesity is a huge problem. And what we find is that children who are obese directly lead into adults who are obese, and the obesity rate is about 1 in 3 adults who are morbidly, or it's not just overweight, it is obese, and it's having direct negative impact on their health consequences. And so we looked at, well, how far do we have to go back to see this window of opportunity for children? And it turns out around the age of 6, they start sitting a lot more, right? So they're in classrooms, they're taking lots of classes, and because of that, their sedentary behavior tends to increase. And so between the ages of maybe 6 to about 10 to 11, so that elementary school age is where physical activity experiences a precipitous drop. And so it goes down from, if you look at little kids under the age of 6, you can't get them to sit down. And then they go to school, and then they're sitting down all the time. And so it's this huge drop in physical activity that we would like to hone in on. And how do you get these kids to become active? And what was really interesting is that around that time of us trying to figure this problem out, where American Heart Association released a report, and they were saying that dog ownership actually leads to a pretty big increase in physical activity, because it turns out even if you don't exercise, you will walk your dog, right? And so during that time, a lot of people tried, well, why don't we integrate actual dogs as health interventions? And it turns out dogs can't be programmatic. They can't say, well, yesterday we went on a 20-minute walk, and then tomorrow, why don't we go for 25 minutes, right? And so having a systematic pet is actually pretty difficult. And because of that, the results of these interventions that try to integrate the family dog were kind of mixed. It was all over the place. And so we took a look at this and we thought, you know what? Pretty interesting. What if we introduce this idea of changing behavior through virtual agents? And the behavior change comes from a very well-known theory of self-determination. And so we know what intrinsically drives people to change behaviors, and that comes from autonomy. So the feeling that I have a choice of this behavior change. Competence, I'm good at this. And then finally, relatedness, like someone cares about me changing my behavior. So we came up with this virtual fitness buddy ecosystem where the point is to integrate a virtual agent, a virtual dog, and that virtual dog allows the children to set and meet physical activity goals. And if you actually work with these sorts of elementary age children, you go up to them and you ask them, what do you think a goal is? What's a goal? It's really abstract. They're like, something that my mom wants me to do, right? It's really difficult for them to understand what a goal is. And once you reach the goal, to set a higher goal. And they're kind of like, but I just reached the goal and you want me to set a higher goal, right? And so this whole idea of mastery experiences, getting them to achieve something, and then setting a higher goal so that they have a challenge and then going for that higher goal is a really hands-on, high involvement phenomena that requires the involvement of adults. It's really difficult for kids to do it alone, which is why a lot of that active games and esports arena, if you throw games at kids, it works for a while, but once they are done with the games, that behavior change tends to dissipate. There's no more behavior change. So sustaining that behavior becomes really difficult. And so we designed the virtual pet to allow the kids to really work with that pet to set their physical activity goal, experience mastery, and then set a higher goal. And eventually walk the kids through this progress over a long period of time. All the kids were wearing Fitbits, and then immediately as they are interacting with the virtual pet, the parents are receiving real-time notifications via SMS or text messages so that they know what's going on. They can also text back encouraging text messages, right? And so I saw that you just received or you just achieved a physical activity goal, you can do it, right? And so even if I'm here and my kid's in the after-school program, I still want to know what's going on. It's not that like I've abandoned my child. And so the parents stay in the loop, and they're able to see a dashboard where they're able to track the physical activity progress over time. And here's a quick video of the prototype.
I get to choose a name and a color and a tag color. So I'm going to name this dog Grace. We'll choose red and black. We're at the University of Georgia, and our backdrop is University of Georgia buildings and architecture. Sit. Stay. Good dog. Lay down. Hey, good job. All right, he doesn't know how to do a whole lot more right now, so I'm gonna have to run out and go do some more exercise. Uh, Spin around. Stand. Good, good. Down. Roll over. Play dead. Moonwalk. Good boy. Fetch. Speak.
Mixed reality kiosk, placed the virtual agent inside of it, and we took it out to initially lots of summer camps and after school programs, and the pilot data was actually pretty striking. The children not only met physical activity goals at their own pace, which really follows that self-determination theory. So we're not setting external goals for them. They are setting their own goals, experiencing mastery, and then moving forth into challenges under the guidance of this virtual agent, which will play with the children once they set and meet their physical activity goals. And so these studies showed that the virtual pet allowed the children to exercise over 1 hour a day more than the children without a virtual pet. So we gave the control condition children a Fitbit and a computer that basically does the same thing, but without the social support through the virtual pet and their parents staying in the loop. And so with that social support, they're exercising far more daily. And then we find out that the virtual pet is able to really successfully guide the children through this goal setting and mastery experience. And the virtual pet is designed to demonstrate vicarious reinforcement. So when the children exercise in the real world, the virtual pet becomes faster, thinner, happier. You see the tail wagging. It's far more responsive. And what's really fascinating is that we don't have to necessarily drill into the kids. They understand pretty quickly that their physical activity in the real world has direct consequences and relationships with the virtual pet's health and happiness. And they report back to us things like, oh, I have to exercise and I have to walk around more because I want to take better care of my pet. So this relationship was pretty intuitive for a lot of the kids. The increase in physical activity achieved through this point-based rewards, when we emphasize points, it will take them to a certain point, but the extrinsic reward portion dissipates really quickly after they kind of blast through all the levels that we created, and then it actually falls lower than the original baseline. So it turns out when you emphasize the points and the gaming mechanism of things, it can work relatively quickly, but then end up with lower than baseline outcomes. And so the gamification portion will work for a very short term. Once the game is finished, the behavior change does not sustain. And we actually were able to get a $3.5 million grant from the National Institutes of Health, and we expanded this into 19 after-school programs. We have gathered data from over 900 children and parents, and we tracked their data over 6 months. It was originally supposed to be 9 months, and then in our final cohort, COVID hit, and then the after-school programs were no more. There were no more after-school programs, and so we had to quickly pivot in our last year from going through this mixed reality kiosk in a group-based setting to an iPad version of it so that we can go into different households. And so that's how we wrapped up the final cohort. We were able to get 3 waves of data of survey, weight, height, BMI, actigraph, and the minute-by-minute Fitbit data. So you can just imagine the volume of data that we get. And of course, this goes back to the keynote that we heard yesterday. Now I'm thinking maybe I should have told them that. So this is a lot of data that we're still trying to figure out how to analyze. But here are some of the preliminary findings that we have published. So the sort of autonomous tracking and assessing, so leaving basically the kiosk alone without any researcher involvement in the field is not only feasible, it is highly effective. And so now you're getting to this idea of precision health where each intervention is tailored for each individual child. And this has not been possible with traditional health interventions where you had to give health coaches an in-person interventions for every single participant. But now we're able to go in with kiosks and leave it there. And this whole entire loop of the kiosk, child, Fitbit, parent SMS, dashboard tends to work really well over a long period of time. And so we're able to test that feasibility. The challenge of place and space and scaling this to 19 after-school programs is unbelievably high. Things from we can't get some of the Wi-Fi signals to go through the really thick cinder block walls where you have zero even like cell phone signal. And so we had to figure out how to localize all of the signals going back and forth. To some teachers feeling like this is intrusive to the things that they had planned for the after-school program, to some IT professionals feeling threatened because this is very high tech. And so, lots of things when you're scaling out from your laboratory to 19 different after-school programs and hundreds of users is just that scale of problems that we faced during this entire, it was a 5-year project, was just phenomenal. And so we've published on the things that we've learned and the things that you could potentially avoid when you are trying to scale up a program like this. And then the validation tells us that using Fitbits is actually pretty accurate when you compare it to a research grade actigraph. It does tend to overestimate slightly, but it is within acceptable measures. And so if you're interested in using Fitbits for physical activity evaluation, it has been validated within this age group. And of course, the 6-year-olds, very interesting group. You get things like, I flushed mine down the toilet. And you're like, why? Or, I didn't really like my color band, so I tried to swap it with my friend. You're like, no. And so the 6-year-olds are very challenging to work with. In our next iterations of this project, we have dropped the 6 and 7-year-olds. And so only 8 and above are able to follow through with the intervention protocol at this length of time. And then we see something really interesting where the ecosystem elicits more social support from parents of girls versus parents of boys. And so traditionally in the physical activity literature, what you see is that boys are already pretty active. And so when you do this intervention, of course, it's going to be more successful for boys. The physical activity interventions have relatively had low impact on girls. And what we find here is that when we integrate parents into the loop, then the parents of girls become far more cognizant, right? They become reminded that, yes, physical activity is still important and they need to provide the, it may be logistical support or programmatic support or emotional support, but the parents of girls realize that their support is critical to their kids remaining physically active. And so the parents of girls stay more socially supportive in their physical activity goals. And then finally, the most recent one that we published is that we're able to demonstrate that in this scale of hundreds of children, we are converting their sedentary time into light intensity physical activity. What's really important here is that we are actually converting that time primarily in the kids who had low baseline. So these are the kids who are sitting around to begin with. The active kids, they don't need this. They're already active. They're already playing whatever, basketball, tag with their friends. The kids who had low baseline from the get-go are the kids that we're able to get to move around. Are they running around? Not necessarily. So this is more light intensity physical activity, but we are converting substantial amounts of sedentary time into light physical activity, and then hopefully the light physical activity serves as a gateway for something that's a little bit more moderate to vigorous later on in the down the road. And then now we are in the process of analyzing this minute by minute Fitbit data. It is monstrous. It is a lot of data. And preliminary data suggests that what's really interesting is that when people and the children get access and exposure to this ecosystem, their impact, so the impact of the media exposure tends to decay at a slower pace. So we know that all media exposures, treatment effects decay over time. This is natural, right? It's really difficult for you to get a 3-minute exposure to something and then say that it lasts over time. It's really, it tends to dissipate relatively quickly. Virtual reality exposures dissipate at a slower pace, but nonetheless, decay is inevitable. What we find is that this decay pattern is substantially slower for the virtual fitness buddy ecosystem versus a control condition where you're not getting that social support. Right? So you're getting the goal setting and you're getting the feedback, but you're not getting that encouragement from the virtual agent or your parents. When you lack that social support, turns out that decay pattern is much faster. And so when you look at longitudinal effects and how do you sustain behavior change, it turns out a lot of it does come from that social support and trying to encourage the people to sustain that behavior. They know that they need to sustain the behavior. We all know that we need to eat healthy and exercise a lot and go to bed early, the people who stayed out last night. But it's hard to do so, right? Without that social support, this demonstrates that even for media exposure and treatment effects, in order for them to sustain that effect over a long period of time, social support is critical. Sustainability is another area that we've been looking at for a while. I don't know if you've seen the movie Don't Look Up on Netflix. It's actually a documentary. Yeah, so what we find is that people really don't feel personal threat, right? A lot of them just don't feel that today, because my behavior was not pro-environmental, tomorrow Earth is still there. We're still alive. I mean, it doesn't really matter to them because of that long temporal gap between present day behaviors and future consequences. It's really hard for them to really link that causal relationship. And so guilt and fear have been tested. So can you threaten people into being pro-environmental? Not really. They're like, well, we'll just dig our heads further into the sand and pretend that it's just not there. And so we know that this doesn't work because of psychological reactance and avoidance. Positive affect tends to work far better. So giving them hope that their behaviors today will make a better tomorrow. So this is the kind of messages that we need to create. So connectedness to nature, empathy with nature, and communication has to be relevant. It needs to be personally relevant to the audiences that you are targeting. Otherwise, it kind of goes all over your head and people are not paying attention because everybody has too many messages to deal with. So here's one study that we
Even before the hurricane-force winds reached the Outer Banks, the storm surge began to flood streets and homes.
A hurricane in the virtual world.
Oh no! It looks like the hurricane has knocked out power in your home.
It's a lot more than a game. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty of what's happening.
We've been working for over a decade, looking at how virtual reality environments can be used outside of the gaming environment and leveraging the power of communication within these virtual worlds to see if we can change behavior, not just within the virtual worlds, but outside of them as well.
Dr. Grace Ahn runs the Center for Advanced Computer Human Ecosystem.
Lots of really nice things about me. But what's really important here is that we're testing this impact of hurricanes, and we live in the state of Georgia, and Georgia is a coastal state along with Florida and South Carolina. Every year, the hurricane induces just incredible damage. What's worse is that it's getting further more intense and far more frequent. And what we are seeing is that a lot of that flooding impact is coming more inland. So even if you're not living on the coast, now it is a relevant problem to you. And what we see is that a lot of the coastal residents, when they receive evacuation orders, first of all, they don't even know what to do. They're like, well, where do I go? What do I pack? What is this? How do you evacuate, right? If I were to tell you immediately we need to evacuate, do you know what to do right now? People tend to panic, or they'll think that the four walls of their home feel psychologically safe. And so they don't evacuate. They think that this is my home, I have lived here, we have been here for generations, and therefore it will keep my family safe. And it turns out water really doesn't care where you are. It can be very, very dangerous, even fatal if you choose to stay while under an evacuation order. And so the first part of the simulation takes you through what can happen to you if you choose to stay at home. And the hurricane induces a storm surge flood. And so you see the water level rise and it goes all the way up over your head. And I've been doing this for several years at this point. And when that water level hits like right under your chin, it's very uncomfortable. You're like, where do I go? And people often like try to stand on their tippy toes because they're like, maybe I can allow myself to have a few more seconds. We've also taken this out to community fairs, and there was a little kid, maybe about 7 years old, and he was sitting on a chair while experiencing this virtual flooding, and he put his feet up in the chair because he's like, I don't want my feet to get wet. So it's really realistic. But we don't end with that threat, right? Because if we end with a threat, we're basically telling them there's nothing you can do, you're gonna die. And part 2 introduces this concept of self-efficacy. So we walk them through the procedure, the step-by-step procedure of how are you going to pack your bag? What do you need to pack? Why is it important? Have you boarded up your windows? Do you have fuel in your car? Where do you go for sheltering? When is it safe to come back? So we walk you through all of these steps so that you're able to build a mental model, a mental schema for what to do. You have the muscle memory. You have actually packed your bag. You have actually put fuel in your car. And so when the actual event strikes, there is some idea of how to respond. And so our first study looks at the threat only. So we give them the threat portion. You get flooded and you die in this, you drown in this hurricane. And then we give you threat plus efficacy. So what's better? What really works? And it turns out that hope is important for issue involvement, right? So are they paying attention to this issue? Doubt really is not. So if we plant doubt in your mind, then you're kind of like, I think everybody's going to die. So why even bother changing behavior? So hope is very important. Mitigation intention. So are you going to do the short-term and long-term behavior changes in order for you to be prepared for the next incoming hurricane? Turns out self-efficacy is important, threat is not. And so again, the positive affect of you being able to change your behavior to avoid negative consequences is what gets you to initiate that behavior change and sustain it. And then now what we're looking at is the psychological ownership over these virtual objects. So when we put you in a virtual home, does it really feel like it's yours? And then is there a difference? Or does it kind of feel like a video game? Like, so what if my virtual home is flooded and it's damaged? And so we allow participants to either customize their virtual home or they go into a preset home. And then the preliminary results seem to point to that the psychological ownership is the key to getting this experience to come alive. So if you feel like, well, this is just a home that I was thrown into and it's a virtual home, it's digital assets, then you don't feel as impacted by the flooding as you would if you had actually customized and made it yours. And you build that psychological ownership towards that perception of place. And so you're turning a virtual space into a place by building psychological ownership. Once that happens, that linkage happens, then you're far better to really feel that threat of hurricanes. So it's not just the threat, or it's not just that spatial presence. Psychological ownership is the key mediator driving this impact for you to feel like you want to do something to avoid that risk. So now we're engaged in translational science. So what do we do with all of the virtual experiences that we built? We're working with NOAA and the National Hurricane Center. We just released this like 2 weeks ago out to the public, and we have a website where they can log in and download the VR experience and the educational materials. We have manuals, protocols. So how do you download it to your MetaQuest headset when you have access to it? The National Hurricane Center is actually integrating this into their training program, as well as the NOAA National Weather Service. And so we have branded this. We worked with communication experts to create a logo, a certain I guess, a unifying look to it. So we have traditional materials like slides and videos that are designed to accompany the VR experience so that we don't just throw a VR experience out at you and then call it a day. It actually builds into this training module where you get the basic information, you get the VR experience as active learning, and then you get the debriefing portion so that you get the full array of information necessary to really get you to understand why this is important. And so we're getting about 3,000 visits per month at the moment. And so if you're interested in trying this out or integrating it into an existing training or education portfolio, if you want to try it out for a study, you're more than welcome to do that. But this is available to the public at the moment. We also do a lot of community events. And so we work with community partners, Earth Day events, Science Atlanta. We work with different festivals. We take the VR headsets out to K through 12 institutions. The kids love it. It's where, you know, they come to us and they're like, I hate science, but this was so much fun. Right? And so they don't really realize that this is learning happening in an active portion of their day. And we tend to work pretty closely with the community. These are all my students this is actually a spouse of a student who has been sort of integrated into the fold. We do a lot of this, like setting up of tents and going out into the field and educating people. And so this is sort of our community engagement portion of the center. Now for the structural inequities, which is a big banned word in the US, and nobody posts this on social media. What we work with, it's a little sad, I shouldn't be laughing about it, health and inequity problems that I learned by teaming up with a lot of environmental health scientists. And so you would think that longevity is related to things like education, your wealth, your socioeconomic background, but that's not necessarily it. The biggest predictor is your zip code, where you live. It's the water you drink, the air you breathe in, the soil that you live in. So it's basically, this is sort of the biggest predictor across all studies that predict your longevity. And there are years of structural inequity built up. And so when you tell an individual, why don't you just like move into the heart of Amsterdam? People would laugh because it's just not possible, right? How do you up and leave and go into the downtown center where housing is multiple millions of dollars? It's just not easy. And so your individual choices are actually pretty restricted to what is feasible within your bandwidth. And I think a lot of people forget about that. They're like, well, if this area is better, why don't you just move and live in a better area? Or, you know, why don't you just like live a better life? And it turns out that the structural inequities that have been built up for decades really do restrict you in terms of making that choice. In the past, when we approached this, we actually went about this at an individual behavior. Because we were like, well, if you know, all sustainability can be changed by individual behavior, wouldn't that be great? And so we actually tried some crazy things like, can you embody non-human entities like animals? We turned people into short-horned cows and then bodies of coral. Found out that body transfer is far more important than spatial presence when it comes to experiencing these environmental damages and then changing behavior and then actually getting you to care about things. And so we tried all of these things, and it works relatively well for a short period of time. But again, no individual behavior is structural enough to get to the bottom of the fundamental problem. And it wasn't just us, right? In the past, when VR first came out, everybody was interested in, can we get you to embody something else? And then you understand the whole thing. And so we actually looked at racial prejudice because that was sort of what everybody did. Can we get you to experience a life in somebody else's body? And then will that change your mind about racial prejudice? And when we do a 20-year systematic literature review on all things that were in virtual environments, right? XR, across the board, 2D, 3D, video games, everything, it actually does not work. in the 68 studies that we ran through, and like the initial sample was a lot. It was the final 68 articles that we actually reviewed, that was close to about 9,000 participants. Only 2, I believe, were affected. So the other 66 studies that look at racial prejudice, so the other studies were at least not harmful, but some of them actually backfired and created more stereotyping and more bias. And so it turns out that by exposing people to stereotypes in virtual worlds under the name of science, we may be actually harming our participants, just to demonstrate that yes, prejudice exists in the virtual world. We know this, right? So we've demonstrated this for 20 years, and we believe that it's probably time to move on. Like, this doesn't work. It has been established. If it works for a really, really short amount of time. Oftentimes, it will backfire because you're actually not able to become another person, right? That's you imagining and playing the role. Lisa Nakamura actually calls this identity tourism. So you think that you can be Black or Asian or white or some other person, a man becoming a woman becoming a man. This is you imagining for 5 to 10 minutes that you are this person. There is no way that you can actually live the day-to-day sufferings of this person over multiple years. And that's what that lived experience is, not this 5 to 10 minute identity tourism. And so there's a lot of virtual blackface going on where you put on a mask and you think that this is that experience. And what Lisa Nakamura argues about this identity tourism is that when you experience this and you come out of it and you're like, you know, that wasn't too bad. I don't know what they're complaining about. Like, I was a woman for 10 minutes and like, it wasn't that bad. You know, and when this happens, you actually start creating potentially even more prejudice for these people. And are they really going to change their minds about it after a 5 to 10 minute experience? And we thought about this for a really long time because it's an issue, it's a problem. And as researchers, we need to collectively think a little bit deeper about what it is that we're exposing our participants to, because we all know that XR is a very powerful platform. And so
When I was
what
10
we
years
came up
old,
with is,
my dad would talk about the neighborhood being
partially this
called
one.
undesirable, some discriminatory housing policy called redlining. The city recognized this area to build landfills and chemical plants across the street. I'm going to show you something over here.
The State Highway Patrol began moving in on the marchers as they approached the entrance to the state landfill.
Oh, that'll be the tea. Would you please help me pour the water at the table? It turns out the soil was toxic too. We pleaded to the city zoning councils about our health. We had higher cancer rates and kids always had asthma.
So this idea of a shared reality is when you are not embodying that person, but you are walking alongside this person, engaging in very mundane activities like making tea together. So what we want is for people to be actively listening, right? To share that reality and the lived experience with that person by listening to their stories, listening to what they say. And so instead of creating experiences that you are sharing as someone, we want you to create experiences where you share with another person. So you're not becoming that other person, because that's just impossible. And why don't we just acknowledge that it's not possible, and to share that reality with another person so that you're listening to their stories. I think active listening, not just this, right? That's just like having ears and sound is coming through it. But active listening is sort of that first step to creating a common ground where you are truly communicating with the other person. And so we took this into Emory University and allowed the first year medical students to learn about environmental health. And to integrate this into their learning and education portfolio, where Emory University is trying to walk away from one-way lecturing. So it turns out when you lecture people that environmental health is important and there is injustice and environmental racism is a thing, they're like, And then they take an exam and then they walk off, right? So instead of doing this, they want to integrate some active learning components into their curricula. And so we went in there and worked with their first year program students, and the response was just phenomenal. In terms of what's next, so what are we going towards in social XR? And what are we working at? Like, where is our mindset now? And so back in 2020, I don't know if any of you went to IEEE VR or go to IEEE VR regularly, but in 2020, IEEE VR was set in March, and it was supposed to be in Atlanta, and so I was a part of that programming committee, and then COVID hit. Like literally 1 week before. And so we had to pivot very rapidly onto a fully virtual conference. And we had about 2,000 attendees attend this conference that was hosted in Mozilla Hubs and Twitch and variety of platforms that Mozilla Hubs allowed, asymmetrical interfaces so you can use your tablet, your phone, your VR headset, your laptop, whatever you had in front of you. And we hosted a 4-day conference in a virtual world for virtual reality scholars. And so initially we're like, oh my God, this is going to be great. Everybody's going to be in VR. No. It turns out that virtual reality scholars suck at using virtual reality. Did you know this? I mean, I was stunned. We were just blown away. And so, of course, we conducted a study because I thought it was fascinating. And what we find is that social presence is highest. So when people are in VR, they're like, this is great. This is amazing. It feels just like we are in an in-person conference. But the people, even VR researchers, hate using it. And what we find is that although everybody, even during COVID, they had multiple headsets at home, only 1/3 of the researchers actually put on a VR headset, which blew my mind. What are the other 2/3 doing? They were all on their laptops streaming this on Twitch, right? And so what we find is that only 1/3 is able to do this. And so that got me thinking, like, well, how do we virtually conference? Because we all have experienced really bad virtual conferences. They do not work. The hybrid versions, I hate it. It never works out, right? Because you're like, are you listening? Are people actually asking questions? It's really hard to feel that sense of social presence. And how do you design virtual conferences when you're at home and you have kids to tend to, the pet is wanting something, whatever, got to go walk your dog and run some laundry, you got to grab lunch. And there are things that kind of get in the way of you participating in a 4-day long conference. It is just not feasible. And so what we find is that the virtual conferences need to work around these various levels of friction, whether it's device-oriented or life-oriented. And instead of having long 2-3-day sessions, quick short bursts of activity work far better. So we've been setting up social VR salons where we gather together for about an hour. Everybody jumps in VR. You have to use VR. There's no other option. If you give people the other option, they're always on the laptop. So no other option. You have to use the VR headset. We are in there for an hour. Everybody has a blast. And then we all go and have whatever, go through our rest of their day. And then the next day, we might have like a short burst of sessions. And so you have to plan it maybe potentially for a longer period of time where you have separate divisions, but acknowledge the fact that it's virtually impossible. You are setting people up for failure when you ask them to block out 3 whole days of their lives at home. It's just not going to work. We're also interested in this concept of morality. So I'm sure everybody has had some sort of exposure to this virtual pit, right? Anybody not been on a virtual pit before? It's pretty common. So, oh, you haven't? Oh, maybe we need to put you through a demo. The idea is that you are crossing this 30 feet deep pit. It's a very deep pit. And then we actually bought a wooden plank. So we set it up in the lab. And when people put their foot on the plank, that's when they freak out, right? There's a haptic sensation of that wood giving a little bit. And what we are interested in is we have divided this plank into different pieces of wood. And everybody gets 20 pieces of wood. And if you use all of the pieces of wood to cross over into the other side, then those pieces of wood disappear. and the remaining participant has nothing left. And so we give participants essentially a Likert scale of pieces of wood, 4, 8, 12, 15, what is it? No, wait, 16 and 20. I know how to count. And so when we give them this set of 20 pieces of wood, and they have to determine how wide their plank is, and then take into consideration the fact that they are taking the pieces of wood from the remaining participant who was waiting to go. And they are understanding that if I take something, so it's like a game of prisoner's dilemma, but far more visualized. And what we find in our preliminary findings is that when they perceive high threat in VR, so when we don't have the pit, they're like, sure, take all my wood, it's fine. I just need like a couple pieces. But when we have that pit under them and we ask them to stop in the middle and check it out, so we ask participants to look down into the pit, and we measure physio data. So you see heart rate surging, skin conductance is dropping. They're highly focused. They're like, oh my God, I could die. And then we ask them, how many pieces of wood are you going to use when you cross back into the pit? And then we find that everybody is like, I want a larger plank. You think that when you are facing this moral choice, you're gonna be a really nice person. You're gonna be very fair. I have 10, you have 10. Turns out people are not that nice. And so when we put you in this position, they're like, oh yeah, 18 or 16. Nobody really goes, we haven't had anybody go for the full 20. So they're like, fine, we'll leave like a couple. But you will have the most comfortable length of plank that you can create. But it's not because you're a mean person. It's largely because it decreases your perceptions. You're cognitively so loaded and focused in what you're currently experiencing, right? Your own plight, that you're not really focusing on the other person's suffering. So when we ask people, they're like, well, I don't think it's that bad for them. They're not even focused on, they're not really thinking about the other person. So it's not necessarily driven by meanness, it's more the self-preservation drive. And so when people think that everybody is going to make a moral choice during an emergency, it's not necessarily because they were mean to begin with, right? These are not bad people, but we see in the data that they are not able to focus on the plight of others when you are solely trying to save yourself. And so this has a lot of implications for morality decisions that are not necessarily hypothetical. So you're not imagining saving other people, or you're not imagining killing others. This is a very real situation in which we're able to test a lot of these hypotheses. And then our third area that we're looking at is novice versus expert. And so now we have the capability to track eye data across maybe 15 or 16 people in the same virtual environment. And so we're currently working with the Atlanta Hawks, who is a basketball team. And the only thing that I know about basketball is that you have 5 people on each team, like high level knowledge. And so what we're working with is the eye movement, the gaze movement, because it tends to differ between novices and experts. Experts, it turns out, they don't really do a lot of exploration when they watch a game, for example. When they're doing game analysis or strategy building, they know exactly where to look, and they focus on it and focus on it for longer durations. Novices, on the other hand, their eye gaze is all over the place. They don't even know where to look. They're like, some people just never catch on. And so by the time they find areas to focus, they don't have sufficient time to do that. And so what we're trying to do is visualize the expert's gaze, put them in the same simulation, and the experts are then able to really guide the novices, not through just verbal conversations, but also by showing them where they're looking. And that should hypothetically be able to reduce and accelerate the training time for novices involved in this. And so it's a multi-user eye tracking and synchronous gaze application. So if you go back to a lot of the media scholarship back in the days, media effects used to be one user, one device. You had one television per household, you had one screen per person. So this was what we used to look at. And then nowadays we're looking at multitasking, because everybody multitasks. When you are in the theater, when you're watching a movie, when you are talking on the phone, using your laptop, you have multiple devices in front of you. So it's one user, multiple devices. In the future, we are going towards asymmetrical interfaces where everybody is meeting in the virtual world, the XR environment, but they're using different devices because this idea of everybody having access to a headset and using it, as you can see from our IEEE VR data, it is not feasible. Even if you have the expertise and you have access to the digital device, there's just too much friction, and also you might not be in a social situation where you're allowed to, or you feel like it's normative to use these devices. And so eventually we are moving towards this, everybody uses whatever they have at hand, and then we meet in the same XR space as we're interacting with each other. What's really interesting about this, and it introduces a lot of interesting research questions, is that the media technology features will determine how and what is possible in these communication interactions. Some people will have arms, some people will have video, some people will only have audio, and when you interact together, it's going to create different levels of barriers and the action possibilities that allow you to communicate in different ways. And so this asymmetrical interface that is going to be far more popular as we move into this XR space will introduce a lot of interesting questions for us. How can we communicate effectively? Potentially, this is the new digital divide, so it's no longer just about do you have access to things, but how well are you able to use these platforms will be an interesting question. And then media appropriateness is sort of the idea that we want to go into. I think in the past, it has been media richness. The richer the media, the better the communication was the former way of thinking. But it turns out that we have had way too many meetings that could have been emails. Yes? Or you could have just called somebody instead of going on Zoom or being in VR. And so whatever media platform is appropriate for your goals, you have to think about that rather than assuming that rich media is always the way to go. Is VR the answer to everything? Absolutely not. Does it meet your goal is what the question should be. Space is going to be important, where we are there together, but not just because we are communicating through audio or communicating through text. It is this phenomenological, physically sharing space. That perceptions of kinesthetics and movement is going to be absolutely critical. It was always important, right? Personal distances have always been important in communication studies, but in the past where interpersonal communication was key. And then we had this whole era of communication mediated through computers. And then now we're going back to a space where it's mediated, but movement and space is again important. So all the things that we found in the past decades have now become important in this space of XR. And then finally, literacy is going to determine what you know and how you use this, right? So digital divide generation 1 was focused on access. Do you have access to media? But it turns out now the affluent families are actually controlling digital exposure time. So it's interesting how the more affluent you get, the more they try to control digital exposure. The less affluent you are, then the more exposure you have to digital devices. And so digital divide 2.0 is more focused on literacy rather than just exposure and access to media. These are sort of the, let's recap everything that we've covered. Stories that can be experienced in XR, intelligent agents as social support, and then getting a practice at all the life's events by building mental schemas. And then translation of abstract information is going to be critical for XR experiences. Are we able to translate really difficult health and science information into the community so that they can experientially learn all of this? Creating common grounds in terms of experiencing with another person, not as another person. And then finally, theory-driven designs that shape behaviors rather than going with your gut feeling of how to design these spaces are going to be absolutely important. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. It's very interesting. Do we have any questions?
Yep. Oh, you have to throw it, no?
Thanks for the great talk. Willing to continue it a couple of weeks ago, next in the time. But anyway, I was thinking about all the experience that you have about, taking place. I mean, going with the others instead of being the other, right? And the thing is, the empathy cycle is something which is always bi-directional, right? So I give, but I also expect to receive. So there's a closed loop. So how can you integrate in these experiences the perception for the participant, right? So it's not that the participant needs to understand the other, but that he or she needs to feel that the other understands his or her problems, because he's not mean. He just has different problems than the problems that he's witnessing, right? So this I tend to lack to feel that listening to the participant is a bit of a lacking in the studies overall. So I'd like to know what you think about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question that we had to grapple with for a really long time. And all of these experiences were built with the community, and this is sort of the result of maybe like 25 to about 30 iterations of feedback cycles. And what they're experiencing, particularly in the Black African American community, is that they're burdened with this responsibility of having to tell their story over and over and over. And because they're already under-resourced, and they're minorities, right? There's just not enough of them to share and go out and actively share their stories every single time. And so the hope is eventually we're able to create some version of some database of their stories so that we can help them tell their stories. But this is sort of that prototype version of what that might look like. And so they just want to be able to tell their stories to a larger audience, but burdening them with the responsibility of this dynamic interaction is a challenge. I think the best maybe middle ground that we can come up with, and it's still not a perfect solution, is potentially integrate AI, but AI just is not there yet. But hopefully we're able to use some sort of like their own database of their experiences so that people are able to listen, because there's just so many more to educate than the people who are available to do that. So unfortunately, there's no perfect answer to this. We're still grappling with it, but this is what the community organizations have told us. Like they have to be the ones telling this story, and they're just tired. And so this is an issue that potentially the XR community can step in and help them tell their stories. Does that address some of that?
Hi, Grace. Thanks for the presentation. Excellent. I was there at IEEE VR in 2020.
Oh, hope you liked it. Did you use VR?
Definitely did. I used VR.
There you go.
As a matter of fact, so I was one of those 1/3 apparently that managed to get that working. So it was definitely a very useful experiment, right? So the technology make that work for all these thousands of people that were there. That was an excellent experiment. But it doesn't compensate for the fact that everybody was at a different time zone.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that makes it very hard to have a virtual conference.
Yes.
And I was wondering, what are your ideas about crossing that barrier?
Yeah, so there are some people in the, so some of my colleagues at Cornell have been looking at things like, maybe there are some people who are working in the same area, but they're looking at things like, can you record autobiographic experiences and then do a replay of it? Which is not perfect, again, but it does introduce this idea of this person was not available at this particular time and we had a discussion. Maybe they can, instead of watching a Zoom replay, a 3D replay of what happened may be better. But the time zone is a sticky point that no XR device is going to be able to solve. And I absolutely agree with you. Every time we have a program committee meeting, it's like 3 a.m. for me. And so it's an issue, but I guess we can be a bit more transcendent in terms of overcoming space barriers, but the time barriers have yet to be solved. maybe a time machine. I don't know. Is anybody working in that space where your time machine? No. In the autobiographic replay of experiences, I know some of the people at Cornell are trying to do this. It's basically like a Zoom recording, a meeting recording, but a 3D replay of it. The idea is interesting. I don't know, because I always think I'm going to watch the video recordings. I never get to it. So I don't know that 2D, 3D is necessarily the problem here, but maybe a 3D playback is better than a 2D playback. So we'll see. But time zones are still a problem for sure. Yes.
All right. Yeah, thanks very much for a super nice presentation. My name is Jesse. I work on VR more from a computer systems angle. And you mentioned, I think twice during the talk, that analyzing all this Fitbit data, there's a lot. So people in my team typically eat a couple of terabytes for breakfast. So I was just wondering, what is the kind of data that you're talking about in that space? If you have like,
I don't know that it reaches terabyte data, but what do I know about statistics? It's very, very simple. So we do have a biostatistician on the team who is taking care, like he also eats terabytes for breakfast, and he's like, oh, this is fun. And so, yeah, the data crunching portion is off to his side, and we do have multiple disciplines joining in. So I only know so much about data.
All right, good. No, that was my point. Like maybe you can collaborate with
100%. Yeah. These problems that we have introduced in this talk is just too complicated for one discipline to handle, and so that center is built in with that idea. So it's communication, engineering, public health, education, biostatisticians, and we all work together on solving very complex problems. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi there, Alina. I work on VR for cultural heritage. And actually, I was curious about your findings. You said that there was a lot of work about this virtual blackface identity tourism and the idea of stepping into this different identity. And I actually wanted to point to some research on LARPing. I would say that, so there's research actually suggesting that you can use LARPing to create positive affect. So allowing people who are, for instance, anxious or have depression to step into a character who is not depressed, who's confident. And actually that's
really interesting.
Yeah, so it's actually going the other way.
Yeah.
And so actually there's some really interesting qualitative work where people describe of course, this is over a longer period of time, they're able to create their own character. And I think that also changes it because they're very much going from their own need and then stepping into something that they want to embody. But they actually describe the fact that when they're in that character, they no longer have anxiety. And so that's quite interesting because you can flip that around, but I think there's a lot of factors there as well.
Yeah, because it's very contextually driven, and I think that's fascinating research because that's absolutely the tip that I give to my grad students when they're on the job market. If they have anxiety, I tell them to pretend that this is like a theater. You are putting on a character. You practice as if you're this really confident person. You own the stage. And then you come down and, during the job interview, you have to stay in character, kind of like how in the Disneyland theme parks, every employee is contractually obligated to stay in character. So if they meet anybody, they're always the princess. It doesn't matter if they're on break time, if they're not, like if they run into somebody in the halls, they're staying in character until they leave the Disney World campus. And so potentially it has really, I guess, that's sort of that empirical anecdotal story that has some data backing it up. But prejudice-wise, I think this is a problem. But for people who experience anxiety, I think there is potential to use that. And I don't know that they actually use this for actual therapy sessions or whether the therapists are, is this
I've proposed some research about that, but indeed, I think maybe, and we can discuss this further, but I think one of the challenges is the depth of understanding.
Yes.
You can understand yourself,
Right.
And you can understand your own needs and
Yeah,
then work
because it's
from
still
that.
mimicking, right? You're not becoming that person, but you are trying to maybe adopt the character that you think is this person.
I think
for
you, I
LARPing.
think you adopt character traits, but
Yeah.
I think the thing is when you're adopting negative character traits that you also dissociate because you don't want to
Yeah.
associate yourself with a negative version of
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah. So I didn't present this, but we actually do have a consumer psychology study where we asked people to become Kim Kardashian and then engage in shopping activities as Kim Kardashian. Their perception, their psychological perception of Kim Kardashian goes up. But then when you ask them, then are you a narcissist? They're like, no, I have nothing to do with that negative character trait. I only want to associate with the positive traits, but I want to disassociate from the negative traits. So I think that's pretty similar to what you're pointing out.
Yeah.
Oh, and then going back to your question about time zones, I just remembered that IEEE VR is now starting this experimental setup of conferencing where they have regional get-togethers. So instead of everybody traveling to this place, you might pick a region and everybody gathers together at that region to have like a mini regional conference during the same time. And it seems to go really well. So maybe potentially that's one way to do it. Gather everybody in a single time zone and then they have like their miniature versions of it. We'll see.
Hi, Grace. Thank you so much for the inspiring study. And I'm also doing the animal perspective taking related study. And I'm really curious about how did you choose the animal in your study? I'm so excited because your study in 2016, that's the only reference I have found in this field.
Yeah, nobody does
Yeah.
anything that crazy anymore.
That's true. Yeah, like how did you choose? I remember you choose the cow, right? And why do you choose cow?
Yeah, it was the cow was actually a pilot study, and we had two much larger studies that were pieces of coral, but nobody wants to talk about that. Everybody calls it the cow study, and I'm like, well, I wasn't like trying to study cows per se.
Yeah.
But the actual idea for this study came about because there was a long line, a pretty large body of psychological or environmental psychology studies that try to take perspective taking into pro-environmental decisions. And so what they were doing in those traditional studies were getting people to imagine that they were ducks in oil spills, or to imagine that they were natural parks and people were littering on them. And then our team was already looking at things that were sustainability related. So we had done, like my dissertation was on tree cutting, so virtual tree cutting. But we were thinking that you are not a duck and you are not a natural park, a national park. And so it's really difficult for you to imagine things that you have never experienced. And we were interested in Mel Slater's idea of body transfer, but he had only done it from human to human. And so we were interested in, well, can you do human to non-human entities? Like we, sort of ran the gamut of, well, what about robots? Or what about like, objects? But then we linked it back into the pro-environmental behaviors. And somebody on our team was a vegetarian. I happen to be a meat lover. And he was like, well, eating meat is an issue. And so we ran a small pilot study with a cow. And later on that led to some environmental activists and animal activists thinking that I was a vegetarian, a vegan, and inviting me out to conferences. And I'm like, but I love meat. I had like eggs for breakfast and they were like, do you know what they do to the male chicks? And I'm like, I don't want to know. But that cow study was more a proof of concept pilot study. And then we were like, oh, it works. And so we ran the two larger studies on pieces of coral and the ocean acidification problems.
Ocean items. Yes, do you think the different animals' choice will influence your behavior? Like probably, like if you ask the participant to adapt a role as a wolf or tiger, whether that could increase their the eat of meat.
Yeah. So for us, the type of animal really didn't make a difference because we were trying to look at body transfer. It wasn't, did you really become the cow? And then now, do you want to not eat meat? So this wasn't what we were looking at. We were looking more at, did body transfer occur even for a non-human entity? And so what your outcome variable will be, I think will determine that linkage, that association. But again, like, can people really become animals is a question mark. I'm sure they can feel like there's some level of body transfer going on where they feel like whatever happens to the avatar, sure, like they'll feel discomfort, but we only took it to the point where we want the participants to be aware of this issue. Like, are you paying attention? I don't think we ever thought that this person was going to feel like he or she is a cow and then therefore start walking on all fours. Like this is not the type of thing that we were going after. It's basically, are you aware of this issue, and now are you paying more attention? Because that's where communication starts, right? In the past, a lot of the communication scholars thought that the volume of information is going to lead to behavior change. So the reason why you're not paying attention is probably because you don't have enough information. Turns out that's not the case, right? We have plenty of information, but how do we break through the clutter to get you to pay attention to what it is that I'm saying to you is what we're going after. And so do we have involvement from you? And that's where we stopped. I don't think it's feasible to, make them feel like they're an animal, and then because of that, they change behaviors. That's a little bit of a stretch, but they will pay attention because now they're like, yeah, that was important for this particular animal. I felt a little bit, uncomfortable as that avatar, and now I'm paying attention.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, I think we should go to a break before the next talk at 11. Thank you for your talk.
Yeah,
thank you for the interesting questions. We do have a little gift for you for coming, joining us this year.